Hi students, it's Mrs. T with week 11, lecture 1 in cultural geography class. This is a continuation of our urban geography unit because, like my announcement said in Blackboard last week, I'm going to slow the pace of this class down. I'm not going to cover as much every week as I intended to cover when we were still in the face-to-face environment. I know that this will help the face-to-face students that I have who have been forced to go online with me for the rest of the semester, but hopefully it will also help you online students who are watching these same lectures, because I realize that this class or your other classes are not your top priority. Maybe they were not to begin with, but definitely not now after your kids are at home and you have to homeschool them and you've lost your job or your spouse has lost your job or your parents have lost their jobs or something, and there's chaos and turmoil. There's fright because of the kinds of news, the news coming out about the coronavirus pandemic. So I just want to make sure that we're able to finish this class successfully because we've come so far together and it's perfectly doable. We can see this light at the end of the tunnel, meaning we only have like 3.5 weeks of classes left before exams. So we're here together in week 11 still talking about chapter 9 because I just want to slow the pace a little bit. So this week's reaction paper can still be over chapter 9. Hopefully you will talk about social stratification, which I'm going to cover today. It has to do a lot with the fact that agriculture brought surplus food production, like we talked about the last time we were together. So anyway, there's a lot of really good and deep kinds of conversations we can have about how cities were made possible through agriculture and surplus that agriculture enabled us to have. But as it says in the textbook, cities are also made possible because of something called social stratification, which is a fancy way of saying social inequality. Inequality is a buzzword that for many people sets up red flags for social justice issues. But surplus in agriculture changed the playing field quite a lot for that first urban revolution when surplus was the name of the game. It changed the dynamic among people and it created different classes of people, a different rank, a comparison between me to him and her and you and etc. Based on the work that we do, our connection to that agricultural surplus, and thus social stratification. Really, when the first urban revolution took place, social stratification was having a revolution of its own. And then as we read more into our textbook and fast forward to the Industrial Revolution and the huge boom in urbanization that took place during the industrialization phase of our history, you can also see further I guess I'll use the word deepening connection between that surplus, that profit that surplus enables people to collect, and social stratification. So that's essentially what today's lecture is going to be about. You'll have this lecture of me to watch and then also another supplemental, let me take that word back, it's not supplemental, it's required, but it's going to be from some other producer on YouTube. So you won't have to be bored with my little makeshift classroom the whole time and my little dry erase markers and such. So anyway, thank you for your patience and thank you for working with me on this. We can get to the end of the semester successfully. Okay, so let's begin talking about social stratification, and to do that, let me give you a definition for it, okay? So stratification is a word that physical geographers use all the time, geologists use all the time. It means layers. It means layers of the atmosphere or layers of the different layers of the earth, like the mantle and the asthenosphere and the lithosphere and all those different layers of the earth. It's stratified, means layering. So when we use this word about society, about the social organization of the culture we live in, we're talking about a ranking. It's a ranking of different categories of people. Here's my abbreviation for the word people. Different categories of people based on their relationship to the resources that are in that society. Okay, so social stratification. It is an unequal ranking of different categories of people. These are huge groups of people in a society. And different people have a different position within our social structure. So I know some of you have had me for sociology class, others have not. I usually draw a 7-rung ladder. I'm not going to, well, I'll go ahead and throw a 7th one up there. Anyway, I usually draw a 7-rung ladder to represent the United States. It's a symbol of the United States if you want to represent the ranking, the social hierarchy that we have of the upper classes, which are here, and the lower classes, which are here, and here's middle class that we hear about so much in politics and the news. The United States is thought of as a middle class nation. Here's the middle class. There's 3 up here and 3 below it. Okay, so take my sociology class next semester so you can learn the names of all these things and you know, go more into depth about that. So social stratification was really not a major thing at all in social structure before that first urban revolution, when agriculture enabled folks to produce a surplus. Now, in the previous video, when we were talking about surplus, we said a little bit about how that surplus enables the producer to keep something for themselves over and above what they need to consume in their immediate social group, like their household, their family. And it enables them to keep something more for themselves than maybe even their community can use in a particular time, you know, at a particular time. And so the person who produces surplus, the people who produce the surplus, have control over something called profit, because surplus is used not as a fair exchange, not as you know, a reciprocal exchange with barter, with generalized reciprocity. No. Instead, profit brings about this ranking system that we deal with in life. And here's how. I'm trying not to go into a 3-hour lecture about this because you don't want a 3-hour lecture. So let me make this break this down, okay? So, with profit, because I am not going to produce extra sweet potatoes on my sweet potato farm just so that I can burn those sweet potatoes and not use them for any reason. I'm going to use what I need for my family, but then I'm going to go out into the public and sell my surplus. So the surplus, I'm going to sell it for profit. I don't want to break even. I want to put a little bit more money in my pocket. Okay, so profit is the name of the game with that surplus that we talked about in the agricultural lesson that we had. Okay, so let's see. I just said a key thing when I gave you the sweet potato scenario. I said I have a farm. So if I have a farm, I am an owner. I own the land. Another major difference between agriculture as a subsistence strategy and the other subsistence strategies that we discussed is that all of a sudden, land is not considered to be a basic human right. The other subsistence strategies, land is considered to be one of many basic human rights that you and I just don't agree, because we're so separated from those subsistence strategies. We are entrenched in industrialization, industrialized agriculture, where we think of ownership as being just par for the course. We think of ownership as being what the American dream propels us toward. However, in the other subsistence strategies, the mindset of the people is that food itself is a basic human right. They would never for a moment consider putting a price on food and selling it to somebody else to make a profit, because food is an essential thing for general subsistence. So food is considered a human right. And therefore, if food comes from land, which it does, then land is wrapped up in that basic human right called food. So ownership of land doesn't really exist. Doesn't exist at all, really, in the way that you and I think of ownership nowadays. A community would share an entire space, acres and acres of space. If you are a horticultural community, the community would work together to produce enough for not only each household, but each household within that particular village. Pastoral societies use a lot of land because they don't manipulate the environment very much at all to produce, to make sure that their cattle or their goats or their llamas or whatever it is whatever herd animal it is that they use, they don't manipulate the environment at all to make sure that they have water sources, to make sure that they have extra food to eat, because those animals need food and water too. And so pastoral societies need a ton of land to push the herd around to water sources, to different places where they can pasture and eat. And this land is considered a human right because those cattle are where we get our calories from. And how am I gonna eat if the cows don't eat and the cows don't have enough water? So this ownership word maybe sounds normal. It does sound normal to you and me. We own stuff. No, you can't use my car. That's my car. We don't have a sharing kind of mentality very much in our modern society. We put privacy fences up in the suburbs. We lock the door to our apartment when we leave. We keep our things private. In our urbanized, industrialized agriculture-based economy that we have. Because ownership becomes very, very important when agriculture enables when agriculture enables surplus, and then surplus is used to make a profit. Now I'm an owner. I don't only own the surplus, but I'm going to own the land that helped me produce that surplus. Okay? So land has a price tag, whereas in the other subsistence strategies, land was not something that the cosmos would allow someone to own. It just kind of wasn't in their mentality that you'd put up a privacy fence or a fence at all to keep something or someone out of your particular territory. These kinds of things, land produced food. Food is a basic human right in their mentality, and therefore you don't own land because ownership would mean that you would bar somebody else from using it. But agriculture relies on ownership of land, because if you want a surplus, the more land you have at your disposal, not the community's disposal, the more profit you can get. So we see with agriculture a unique situation. Your book talks about the first urban revolution. There's a whole bunch of revolutions going on here because ownership of land, this is a very revolutionary idea. Social stratification, to the extent that we're going to study it right now, is a huge and new idea. People were much more level in their social positions before agriculture came around. And then after agriculture came around, it kind of, I don't know, some people would say it went uphill from there, some people would say it went downhill from there. You tell me, just argue your point well, and you know, you get points for that, okay? So, ownership, owners, here is a class of people. In early agriculture, the owners of the land, the owners of the surplus, these were the top folks in that hierarchy, that ranking of different categories of people within society. Another social class, and lots of different social theorists have different official names for these different social classes. I'm just going to give you a description of who would be in here. These folks are the high-level support staff, so to speak, for the owners. So this is like high-level employees. High-level employees. These are the people who the owners rely on to manage their profits. They are the buyers for the seed. They maintain all the equipment on the farm. They maintain the bank accounts. They maintain, in the payroll and all that kind of stuff. So these are the high-level employees that have specialized training or skill. I don't know what word I was trying to write. Specialized training or skill these high-level employees have, so that they have kind of a steady job, and they get, to interact with the owners a whole bunch. Okay, then you have really 2 or maybe 3 other categories of people in early agriculture. We're not talking about the Industrial Revolution yet, but 2 or maybe 3 other categories of people. This third one is going to be specialized skills. It's going to have professional skills, like you are a shopkeeper, you are a school teacher, you're an accountant, something like this. So this is a professional person. You're a preacher for a town or something like that. So professionals that deal with, you're a doctor who takes care of the owners and the owners' children and the high-level employees and the high-level employees' children and everybody who comes underneath. You're a dentist. You're, some kind of big animal specialist because the owners who have the dairy farm need you to tend to their cows. You are the professional people who interact with the owners not very much. You might see their children every day because you're their teacher, but they don't really interact with the owners very much, but the owners rely on them for smooth, steady, stable, organized society moving forward. So professionals would be right here. Then you've got really low skill, no skill or low skill laborers on the bottom, because you don't see the owners picking the cotton. You don't see the owners harvesting the sweet potatoes. You don't see the owners milking the cow on their dairy farm. They don't have to. They can hire these people to employ these people to manage it seasonally. Maybe these people don't even have a job 12 months out of the year, because tomato season is only it's only once a year, right? So I need laborers to harvest tomatoes from my 10 acres of tomatoes, and that's a lot of tomatoes there. But maybe I need laborers only during tomato season, because in the first urban revolution, agriculture was not industrialized agriculture yet. So you didn't have fields that were in production constantly. You didn't have tomatoes in the marketplace outside of tomato season. You didn't have these kinds of things that could be grown in Guatemala, and 3 days from now you're buying it at Super Walmart down the street. So this is before the second urban revolution, when industrialization came in, the factory system came in, and factorized, is that a word? Made like a factory, even agricultural production. And we see all the kinds of genetic modifications and fancy pesticides and herbicides and stuff like that try to help mega farmers, industrialized farmers, produce mega surplus. And you see a whole bunch of different additional strata in society. Now, I said, when I was right here, I said that we maybe have 1 or 2, sorry for my phone going off, let me put it on silent really quick. I said that maybe we have 1 or maybe 2, no, I didn't. When we were here, I said we had 2 or maybe 3, layers or additional strata within this ranking system in that original old-timey agriculture, because the laborers typically were free people. These were typically free people, okay? Free people. But do we always pay, free people get wages, they get money for their labor? We don't always pay people for their labor. That's where number 5 comes in. And yes, I'm talking about the word slavery here, because slaves can be the 5th and most rock bottom layer of society if the owners not only own the surplus, not only own the land, but they pay laborers as little as possible because they buy their laborers instead. That's called slavery, and it's been around since the first urban revolution, since the first agricultural revolution. It is something, of course, that's very deep and painful in the history of the United States, but it is not unique to the United States. It's unique to surplus. It's unique to agriculture. It's unique to that kind of transition that society had on a massive scale. I mean, you saw warfare, people being taken, in war, being conquered or something and taken as slaves. You saw some of that, but it became very, very widespread across society in general because agriculture enabled for a surplus. And these people want profit. If you have to pay laborers per hour or pay them per pound or something like this, then that cuts into your profit. If you can buy slaves and have the slaves reproduce to make you more slaves, then you've got free labor that will help you with more surplus and more land. I'm saying this in kind of an upbeat way. This is a horrible situation that agriculture created for us. It is completely immoral and wrong for anybody, anytime, to own or treat others as slaves. We can go back to the religion chapter, to talk about that. But anyway, owners have surplus. Surplus means profit. You don't have surplus unless you have a control of the land and how it's used. You have to have high-level employees that you count on to kind of keep everything running and expand. That's another situation that I'm going to talk about in just a second. You have to have professional staff that, take out the word staff there, I don't mean that the owners employ them. You have other professionals that rely on the economic situation that the owners set up, like the school teachers or the shopkeepers or the dentists, that kind of thing. Those kinds of peripheral professions that support a village, support a hamlet, support these cities that came on the scene with this first urban revolution. You have laborers. They only own the work that they can do. If they have low skill and all I can get you to do is pick strawberries, back-breaking work, by the way, if that's all I can get you to do, because that's the only skill you have, I don't employ you 12 months out of the year, and I don't pay you very much because anybody can pick strawberries. I need somebody really, really well to be the foreman on my farm, so they can get me the best price on seed, they can maintain my equipment, they can make sure that the laborers don't abuse stuff, they can keep an eye on. I have to pay them more because they're specialized. I rely on them for the bulk of the surplus and the land management that I need in order to make my profit over here. And so this is a major situation that changed the world. This is why we use the word revolution, because revolution means you're spinning around. You are making an about face. You are completely changing something. Social stratification came about because agriculture enabled people to have a surplus. The surplus made profits possible. Therefore, land became something that was owned. And if you make a profit off of this much land, and then you want to make a bigger profit, well, you're going to buy up this much land over here. And then if you want more profit, you're going to buy some land up over here. And then you're going to buy some land up over here. And so land, there's not an unlimited supply to go around. All of us have a mental map of the shape of Arkansas. Most of us do if you live here. There's only a limited amount of land in Arkansas. If owners of land used their profit to buy up more land because land was valuable and helped generate profits, then after a while there would be a very few people who owned the land within Arkansas, and the rest of us would have to be in some of these other levels. So ownership changed things a lot. Changed things a lot for society in general. And as your textbook says, Agriculture, surplus agriculture, and social stratification kind of gave birth to cities, because think about the different kinds of neighborhoods that exist in the cities that you know about today. Do the laborers and the professionals, I shouldn't have erased this so fast, but do the laborers and the professionals and the high-skilled specialized folks and the owners, do all of these folks hang out in the same neighborhoods, live in the same neighborhoods, go to the same schools, shop at the same places, do business at the same... No, they don't. Because agriculture put a price tag on everything. Agriculture put a price tag on land. So now all of a sudden, only wealthy people are going to have a lot of land to have something called an estate or a plantation or a manor house. Wealthy folks are going to have that. Laborers are going to be lucky if they have a tiny little plot of land where they could maybe grow some subsistence level food to supplement their labor wages during the year. And maybe you don't have any land at all. Maybe it's a house that the owner of the property is letting you live in. And when I say house, I'm using that word loosely. Really, I should say hut in a lot of cases, because if I'm the owner of the land and I need laborers, I'm going to put them on my land, and I'm not going to treat them like they are valued guests and let them live in luxury. I'm going to give them the bare minimum, because profit is what I'm about if I'm the owner. So I'm going to give them the bare minimum, and I'm going to pay them the bare minimum that I can get away with, because it would be terrible for me and my position if I paid you enough so you could sock a little bit away and be the one to beat me to a land deal that I maybe want to buy. So social stratification is the downside to this surplus. When we talk about the demographic transition model and how populations really increase over time, we usually look at that as a very optimistic thing, and yay for human society, because we're growing and we're using our innovation techniques and modifying the environment so that it works on our behalf. But with that comes social stratification. With that, certain things like food that used to be considered a human right, it's a crazy idea nowadays for anybody to consider that food is a human right. I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine a few years ago, and we were talking about how healthcare maybe is or isn't a human right. It was when, in politics, really that began to be a major talking point in politics in the United States. Should healthcare be something that the government ensures everyone has access to? And so during the course of our conversation, I was like, well, what about food? What about nutritious food? There are so many medical issues that can be controlled almost entirely in some cases with the proper amounts and the proper nutrition in the food supply. And since we will starve to death without it, why isn't food a basic human right? Why isn't potable water a basic human right? Why isn't clean air a basic human right? Because without those things, we for sure can't survive. Healthcare makes it much nicer, right? We get to have longer lives. We get to have more enjoyment in our lives because we have less stress, and we can, get our ailments taken care of more easily. But anyway, think about that. So agriculture created social stratification, and as we talk about in our textbook, social stratification and agriculture both are the major contributors in this city model of social stratification. Okay, so I'm going to stop this part of the conversation and look at a YouTube video that's going to give us some information about the different kinds of ways that cities have been modeled over the years. About 100 years ago, social scientists, sociologists, and anthropologists and economists looked at city structure and looked at the way cities are built around a central business district or market, because you have to have a market to sell your surplus. You have to have a business district to make and manufacture goods as we get to the Industrial Revolution, when agriculture needed fewer laborers because machines could produce that surplus way more efficiently with way higher yield than laborers could. You could buy that machine and depreciate it over the years, and you didn't have to pay that payroll anymore. You didn't have to have those shacks on your property to let those folks live. You can tear down those shacks and use that for agricultural production now. So with cities and industrialization, those 5 categories of people that I had on the board here for early agriculture, that blows way out of proportion. Because now you have way more division of labor, a more distinct division of labor with way more categories in the society. You see your gender roles playing a huge part in what kind of position you can have in society, with males being the default position in a patriarchy and females and children coming underneath them. So we'll look at the way cities have been built. There's a concentric circle model where you have a central business district and then a transitioning zone around that central business district. The transitioning zone is usually the place where the gentry, here's a word that goes with social stratification. The gentry used to live like ladies and gentlemen. This is the gentry, somebody who is like from nobility, so to speak, or upper crust, like some historians use that phrase. So the gentry, the owners, for instance, sometimes they wanted to live right close to their factories within a city or right close to the market where their surplus is sold. And so sometimes that zone around the central business district was the housing originally for the owners, but then as the city built and you needed your workers closer to that central business zone, the gentry moved to another zone and then another zone, abandoning their houses as it went. So you had transitional zones around a central business district, and impoverished people would move into the inner city, toward that central business district, because that's where they had their low-skilled labor jobs. So they wanted to live close to it. To the job, that is. And so you see the gentry moving farther and farther away with the Industrial Revolution, when transportation was much easier and you could get from way out past the city boundaries into the city much more easily through mechanized transportation, when roads were much more developed. You see something called the suburbs or suburban. The suburban life. So we have a city, and now we have middle class and upper middle class areas outside the city, because those are the people who can afford to to live in those kinds of places. And you see a lot of people moving out and really segregating themselves. There's another word that comes with social stratification: segregation. Suburban life really enables people to segregate themselves from most of what the social problems are that many modern people see with cities and inner cities these days. I think I read in somebody's reaction paper the other day the word, erase this, the word gentrification. Okay, what's this word all about? So anytime you see this on the end of a word, you should know that it's a process. And gentrification is a word that means the gentry is moving back to an area. I said moving back, so let me throw this prefix in front of it, gentrification. So the gentry is moving back to an area that had been abandoned previous decades or even a century before, and impoverished people had moved in. When the gentry becomes interested in that area again, they can start buying up houses very, very cheaply, displacing the population that has been relying on those houses, and they can drive up the property values so that people can't afford to live there anymore. They can fix places back up like it used to be 100 years ago and take over an area because they have the resources to do it. And so these are some dynamics that we see with modern cities after industrialized agriculture and industrialization to begin with. And I'm going to show you a YouTube video that gives you a lot more details about that, shows you how European cities are organized and how some US cities are organized. And so I want you to listen critically so that you can pick out the issues that have to do with social stratification. So that's our major topic from urban geography this week. Those two, this video and that other one I told you you're going to watch. So I hope that you will contact me with questions. Use the discussion board that I have in our Blackboard class. Each week has a discussion board link. Thank you to Matt, who suggested that early on in the semester, so I stuck that in there. Text me with any questions that you might have. I think that was a student calling me right then when we were when it interrupted our lecture. But please don't be a stranger, and let's get through the rest of this semester together. See you soon, hopefully.